Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Off Axis Podcast, where we talk entertainment, acrobatics, business, entrepreneurship, fitness, and more. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys want to support, please share with your friends. Now, let's jump into the podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Off Axis Podcast. I'm here with Brandon Birchak, king of throwing parties on Mondays. Why do you guys always throw parties on Mondays?
Because there's, it's a dark day.
Bring it closer to you.
Yeah, it's a dark day, on Mondays, so that way all the artists can come. You know what I mean?
That's strategic, actually.
That's how
that
we
is
do
a
it.
thing.
It's the best way.
Yeah,
Everybody's free on Monday, right? Typically, a lot of dark days are Monday, Tuesday. So go to a party on Monday. All the artists can recover on Tuesday. Yeah. Still go do their shows on Wednesday.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's the way to do it. Yeah.
So what have you been up to, Brandon? Brandon, for everyone who doesn't know, is former circus acrobat. I guess still kind of a circus acrobat. Yeah. Kind of retired.
I'm pretty retired. I don't do so much circuit stuff anymore. The last time I was at a Red Bull event for high diving in Abu Dhabi, and obviously I'm still friends with like Joey and Orlando and everybody putting it on, and they're like, "Oh, go on, Brands, like climb up there. You used to do some really silly dives. Give us a little, show us something funny." I said the same thing happens to me when I look at the tower. That happens to old people when they know it's going to rain, and they're like, "Ooh, I can feel the pressure dropping." So no, I don't really do any of that anymore.
I get the same feeling at the skate park now. I'm like, my body hurts just kind of looking at this stuff.
Yeah, it legitimately does.
So you did high diving for years?
Yeah, I was a high diver.
A quick background. It's
been
over a year since you've been on the podcast.
Okay. I was U.S. champion in springboard diving. Did a lot of Cirque du Soleil shows. Competed in cliff diving for a while. Had a juggling act in a handful of Cirque shows. Did a couple large creations with Dragon Entertainment. Went down a crazy rabbit hole, a little more than 10 years ago now, regarding, breath holding and, all this like medical witchcraft that I've been involved with, especially the last few years. This year has been completely insane for us. But I can hold my breath for more than 20 minutes. I'll be going public with a world record this year that's going to align with a really big project that we have going on. And, I'm hoping to land somewhere in the 25 to 28 minutes for that. And I lead a research group and team. I work with the university. I have an honorary title there now. I've got a little medical facility up in Summerlin. I work with a handful of other colleagues and doctors, and my main work now is working with like UFC fighters, different pro athletes, and we're resetting nervous system. We're increasing lung volume. I work with a bunch of Mr. Olympia bodybuilders as well. We had, some athletes at the Olympics that did extraordinarily well. We've shown we cracked a really big medical nut in terms of lung volume and how to grow lungs. Yeah. So I recently spoke at the A4M medical conference on like longevity and stuff like that. I'm actually being honored as, do you know the CES conference?
Yes.
Yeah.
Technical stuff.
Yeah. So I'm getting an award at CES for the 100 novel pioneers in medicine and research right now for what we're doing with lungs, because we've tricked the body into growing larger lungs. Yeah. And so we're going to be publishing some medical papers around that through the university, and also doing a study on carbon-60 molecule, and that will align with a handful of other projects like, going public with world records and things like that. And then we'll release the medical information. And it's been like a really crazy year for sure.
Okay, so you said you were going to try to break a record, and you're saying you're going for 25 to 28 minutes underwater. Yeah. What are the rules of this whole breath holding world record thing? So if you pass out and you stay in under for another 10 seconds, does it still count?
No, that doesn't count. You have to be conscious at the end of it. Yeah, for sure.
Is there any physical requirements, or you just get out and you're alive?
I mean, you have to be you know, coherent, I guess. You can't need medical attention upon coming up from the water, essentially. And there's essentially two records in the breath holding world. So if you just held your breath right now, like right, as long as you could, that's kind of considered like the raw record, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also another record for oxygen assisted, where you do a breathe up on mixed gas prior to the breath hold. So it's like almost pure oxygen, but there's some other little things that you can like put in to sort of upregulate even further.
Yeah.
A handful of concepts. And so the raw record is, you know, like roughly 10 minutes, right? There's a handful of like really great breath holders and free divers that have done 10 minutes. Alex Segura is probably like the king. He's on the Mount Rushmore of breath holding. He's done over 10 minutes. He might have the official record right now. I don't remember exactly who's got it. And then there's another guy. There's a French guy. His name is Daguerre is his last name. But anyway, it'll come to me. Legendary free diver breath holder. Also, you know, kind of like has that 10-minute mark in his back pocket. I've done 10 minutes just over 20 times. I've done about 25 times where I've done 10 minutes, like on raw with no mixed gases. And then there's a second record, which is where you breathe up on a mixed gas that's almost all pure oxygen. And that record right now is about 24 minutes. So I'm going to be shooting for somewhere between 25 and 28. It'll depend on how the lead up goes to all the training. There's a handful of things that I'm doing that are like novel, I guess I would say, compared to, you know, where some of the other information and research exists. And so we're shooting for a big number. We'll see. Not completely impossible that I could hit 30 minutes, but I'd have to do some really, really wacky things to my body.
Yeah.
And we're kind of working through the safety of whether or not that's tenable or, you know, completely unreasonable.
So for pretty much everyone who's never done this before, which is everyone who's listening to this 100% sure, how do you feel when you get done holding your breath for 25 minutes or 24 or something? Because I've filmed you doing, I think it was like 22 or somewhere in that range.
Yeah, something like that.
And it was kind of scary, but I didn't want to like ruin your like zen because you were like, you look dead in there. And I'm like, I want to check, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And every once in a while you move around a little bit. So like, how do you feel when you get done doing this?
You know, it depends on how well it goes. So, you know, if everything goes well, then you're fine. You just kind of pop out and you're like, oof, lovely, all good. Maybe recuperate on Pure O2 for a little while. You know, if it's a struggle, I mean, if you're sort of like engaging into that hypoxic zone where things aren't going well, I tend to pull the plug really early if things aren't going well. So I haven't had like a bad breath hold in a really long time. Because if the breathe up didn't go right, if I'm getting like, if I'm starting to get that urge to breathe, you know, anywhere before 20 minutes, I just stop. Because I know that I'm not going to like, you know, knock out this really big one. So then I just pull the plug and I don't do it. I don't push. I don't, you know, there's so many different ways that your body's signifying when you're at risk. And so if those start to creep in early, I immediately stop, reassess how the breathe up went, what was the sort of profile and practicum ahead of time, and why did it fail, as opposed to like trying to push, you know, what, you know, like a 17 or 18 minute failed breath hold into like 22 minutes or something. There's just nothing to gain from that. So I really only do it when it's like going well the whole time. So typically it goes I don't have any issues when I come up and my SpO2 is really high. I'm not hypoxic in any way. My blood oxygen levels are, you know, really fine. They're lovely. and then those are the only times that I really push.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what temperature is the water at?
So, right. So our water is like an act of God, right? You've seen like the filtration system that we have. So, essentially, we've had like some unbelievable people working on this filtration system for years and years and years and years. Essentially, what we have is, the tank that I'm in that you've seen, right? Yeah. Essentially, it's like the world's largest bottle of saline solution at the end of the day. So we have a little computer in this custom, like, software and hardware filtration system that we've built, and it turns it into essentially saline solution. So it's like, automatically recognizing the amount of sodium and the pH and all that, and then it's auto-correcting. And that allows me to be under, a lot more comfortably, right? Especially like your eyes, your ears, your nose, and stuff like that. And then as far as the temperature goes, it depends on how long you want to hold your breath, right? Because a really comfortable temperature for maybe like a 15-minute breath hold is probably like 93 degrees, right? But if you want to hold your breath for a lot longer, you want to go a little bit colder. So the basic rule is you want it to be as cold as possible without like engaging any kind of response from your like muscular tissue. So if it's so cold that things are tensing on their own, then they're using oxygen and they're creating CO2. So you want to go as cold as you can comfortably where you're not like autonomously engaging any muscular activation. So for me, that's around like 86, 87 degrees. But in an ideal scenario, if I want to hold my breath like forever or like 30 minutes, I'm probably starting the breath hold at like, I don't know, 91, 92 degrees. But then I would have a whole bunch of ice dumped in maybe about halfway through the breath hold, because also as I hold my breath longer, my CO2 goes up, and we have the Bohr effect that's happening in the blood profile. So one of the ways that we're going to shunt that response from the additional CO2, because that additional CO2 is going to turn you more acidic, and so you can sort of slow that roll by cooling down the body in general. So ideally, you'd want to have like a really, really smooth, maybe first 15 minutes somewhere just over 90, and then dump a bunch of ice in as you're, having these sort of response levers from all the additional CO2, and you're getting these acidotic response levers happening in the blood profile. So then you drop in a bunch of ice, maybe bring it down to like 84, 85, while your body's kind of in this like hibernative state, and then like really cool off the nervous system for a little bit.
So I have a cold plunge outside set around like 38 to 40 degrees. How long would you be able to do it in that?
In a cold plunge, so at what temp?
It's like 38 to 40 degrees.
Yeah, that's cold. That's cold. I mean, 45 is sort of like feels cold. 40 is like actually cold.
Yeah.
So I think the longest I did in a cold plunge at 40 was, like just over 5 minutes.
Okay, and then cold plunge, let's say it's 40 degrees versus 108.
108 degrees?
Yeah.
Oh, disaster.
Oh, wait. What's a jacuzzi usually set at? Like, which one would you do better in?
Oh, oof.
What's a jacuzzi, like 100?
Like 103, 104, something like that.
Okay, let's do 103.
Honestly, probably similar total times, but way more excruciating in the warm one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're just ripping through every bit of oxygen you've got in the body, and you're just creating CO2 like a monster. Whereas at least in the cold, you're not having that issue. It's just a matter of your like limbic friction and willpower.
That's crazy. I want to get to over like 90 seconds.
So everybody on earth unless you're like, quite obese or you have a history of smoking or, various other health issues. Everybody can do 5 minutes. Everybody.
So you're saying everyone can hold their breath for 5 minutes?
100%. It's not even close. Yeah, 100%.
By just doing the pre-stuff?
You couldn't do it in a day,
Okay.
But, all right, for example, so, I have our consulting company. We work with a lot of pro athletes. We also work with a lot of CEOs that essentially just want to live longer, right? Various kind of rich folk that have like heard rumor about what we're doing, that we're growing lungs or, we're really effective with the nervous system. And so, for example, I work with a professional poker player, a very, very famous professional poker player, and he's not an athlete, more or less, right? However, he has kind of become an athlete in the last couple months that myself and Dr. Williams have been working with him. And I've been training him for just a little bit less than 3 months with some cardiovascular work and some breath work. He recently did a 8-minute and 40-second breath hold after 3 months. And he's a professional poker player.
Wow.
And he's never been a pro athlete in any concept of his life. And he's done over 8 minutes. Yeah.
What would you say are some of the other benefits of being able to hold your breath so long? Like day to day, what are you going to notice?
Yeah. So, so this is one of the big reasons I was speaking at the longevity conference and why I speak at some of these medical conferences, because when you build out additional lung volume, your whole body's working better. And this is a really big medical nut that we've cracked. And this is what's really put us on the map in the research and medical sort of context. So, we have a top 10 Mr. Olympia bodybuilder. His name's Stan. He's lovely. And, he's built like a mutant, right? He's like 300 and something pounds, and he's a total freak. We increased his lung volume 26%. So when that happened, he broke his PR in every compound lift, bench, dead, squat, row, overhead press, right? PR'd every compound lift, every single week for 8 weeks in a row. Now, these dudes at Mr. Olympia have spent their whole lives in the gym, okay? They're lucky to PR one lift a year, maybe. Yeah. So to PR every single compound lift, every single week for 2 months in a row is so ridiculous. It's like video game numbers because we're giving you bigger lungs. And so when it comes to like the health and longevity about having bigger lungs, the body is going to be running at a more alkaline blood profile the whole time. So that's going to lead to an increase in neuroplasticity. That's going to lead to, better function of your GI tract. You're going to have a lower sort of residual risk of things like colon cancer, any kind of cardiovascular issues like heart and lung issues, obviously. And then obviously you're going to sleep a lot better too, because you're going to be running more alkalized, and your body doesn't like to run on an acidic blood profile. And when your lungs are bigger, everything's going to operate better. And as far as I'm aware, we don't really have any other major organ in the body that there's a declarative study that's been done to show how to grow it, right? We can't grow the lungs. We can't grow the liver. I mean, we can grow a liver in a lab, and we can grow the heart essentially by injecting HGH, but none of those are healthy in any way.
Yeah.
So the idea of being able to grow your lungs by 20-25% is so game-changing in terms of longevity, in terms of how well every system in the body is operating. And then also what we're really doing with these athletes as well is we're teaching them how to engage their parasympathetic nervous system more effectively, so that all these biomarkers of stress, like your cortisol levels and stuff in the body, they're so reduced, it's unbelievable. So your resting heart rate is lower. I mean, your sense of like peace and calm and anxiety. That's what I do essentially a lot with like the CEOs that I work with, is that we're really curating a profile where the nervous system is so much more calm because of how we're sort of teaching them to operate it and drive that nervous system.
Yeah. Can you talk about what kind of supplements people would take to improve this stuff?
Yeah, for sure.
So like, what should I take if I'm doing?
Well,
if I start with nothing.
So here's what I would say. Just like anybody that's like, let's say working out for the first time, right? Because you see all these like CrossFit bros that, you know, they've never worked out in their lives. And they want to jump on gear, right? And they've lost their minds. It's a terrible strategy. So the first thing you'd want to do, and way more efficacious than any supplement, is really just doing some of the practice, right? So it's like doing the breath work, doing some of this kind of lung stretching exercises. And then, you know, depending on what you want to do cardiovascularly, there's a handful of different peptides that are going to help you out here and there, but none of them are really the silver bullet. I mean, you know, obviously everybody kind of knows about like BPC and TB5 and running it with a stack of copper at the same time.
But without the copper, that's what I've been doing for the past year and a half or so.
Yeah. Have you taken time off from it, or are you running it straight?
No.
Yeah,
okay. It's been like every I'll do like a month on and then like a month off or something.
Yeah. Totally
Depends
safe.
on just my schedule.
Yeah, totally safe. I mean, you can run BPC and TB5 for about 2 months safely before you want to take some time off. It also depends on like what your dosage is and stuff like that. And ideally, you're doing 2 a day as opposed to 1.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll bump it up a little bit.
If you, I actually have a relationship now with a really unique lab in Florida, and I'm happy to splash that out to you.
Sweet, let's go.
Yeah,
dude, I've been feeling like Superman lately, so I'm like, give me all the stuff now.
Yeah,
I'm ready
for sure. I mean, there's all sorts of other unique things too. Like there's a peptide called astaxanthin, which is, you know, remarkable for like muscle density and just like how your mitochondrial function deals with lipids. And there's it's such a rabbit hole to go down. A good friend of mine, his name is Steve McCain. He was the keynote speaker at the World Peptide Congress this last year, and he's sort of like the messiah of, you know, all of that information. He's really, really clever, unique mind. He was a 2-time Olympian in gymnastics, and so anytime I have questions about peptides or any of that, I really default to him. And then additionally, you know, if you want to live longer, if you want things to work better in the body, the absolute number one thing that you can possibly put into your body is exosomes. So you're familiar with stem cells, right?
Yep. Might be doing some soon.
Okay. Well, I mean, we have a ton at our facility.
Oh,
so
dope.
I mean, we can.
I'll just go through you then.
Yeah, we can do it all there. And Dr. Williams and Dr. Kaufman. So Dr. Kaufman, she wrote the Kaufman Protocol, and it's, you know, based on these like different levers of longevity. And she's really been a pioneer in stem cells and exosomes. So you have stem cells, you're basically familiar with what stem cells are, and then you have exosomes. So you take the stem cells, you put them in a centrifuge, you spin it down, and then you're left with a small strata of exosomes, which are a nanoparticle on the outside of stem cells. And they're a lot safer to be taking than stem cells, because with stem cells, you're injecting someone else's DNA. Now, there's not a huge risk associated with that. However, sometimes you will have your body will have a negative response to this kind of additional DNA. So the safer way and the better way to do it is you're just going to do the exosomes, which are the spun down version of stem cells, and then we extract that strata of the exosomes. They're frozen on dry ice, put into a vial, and you get 12.5 billion or 25 billion in an injection. You can do it in an IV, or we do it locally in the point of the injury. So for example, we had a former UFC champion who had a huge surgery, full ACL, PCL cadaver replacement, and we triangulated a round of exosomes around that injury. And this injury should have been, you know, maybe like 9 months until it's like fully weight bearing. We stacked that with BPC, TB5, and small dose of copper, and 2 rounds of triangulated exosomes around the site of the injury, and they were jogging again in 2 months. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a double cadaver replacement surgery. ACL, PCL, complete replacement. 9 months till they're like kind of up to snuff. 2 months later, they were jogging.
Yeah.
So
I did the same thing with my AC separation.
Yeah.
Should have been like 3-4 months. I was like back in shows after one, just probably because of the peptides.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. And you know, there's there's a lot of stigma regarding peptides because most peptides are done through an injection. And I think that's really unfortunate, sort of culturally,
Yeah.
that there's a lack of understanding there because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you need B vitamins, nobody thinks it's crazy to take a supplement with additional B vitamins, right? But if you need a small peptide chain that's going to help soft tissue healing or increase bone density, there's so much stigma, but it's not steroids and it's not drugs.
Yeah.
It just happens to be the most efficacious way to enlist that protocol is through an injection, because that's how it's most bioavailable, and that's the safest way to store that supplement. Right?
Yeah, it's better on your liver and stuff
It's
too, right?
better on everything.
Kidney.
It's not even close. I mean, when you think
Yeah.
of SARMs and you think about all these lunatics that have been taking SARMs, all these like CrossFit bros and stuff that are just ravaging their kidney, ravaging their bodies horrifically, and they're on all these wacky drugs. There's like a 10x in terms of risk to what some people are doing with, you know, drugs, essentially synthesized drugs, versus what can be done with organic chains of peptides instead, in a way safer way. But we have that cultural stigma because it comes in the form of an injection.
Yeah, I got used to it. It was at first like I didn't even want to like look at. I would have my girlfriend like inject it into the area, and I just like looked away because I was like terrified of needles. And now it's like just a quick hook, like every day. It's
easy,
super easy.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to kind of normalize. I'm like, dude, this is way better than, you know, just taking a bunch of pills and stuff.
Infinitely.
It does have a,
you know, we work with unique CEOs that maybe they played some, you know, sport in college or something, and the bodybuilders and the UFC fighters and everybody. And there are really clear ways to solve all sorts of these different health issues through peptides safely and effectively. And yeah, it's a really unique sort of burgeoning role in the medical world that we're kind of witnessing, and, you know, getting clinical trials on and having more information.
Yeah, I like that stuff though. Like, especially now that I'm getting older, I'm like getting more into it. And now I feel, especially since taking like the peptides and just like fixing my diet and then like the cold plunges and stuff every day, waking up like feeling twice as good as I felt 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I saw your post about the cold plunges. So, you know, one of the reasons why that's so invigorating, right? And why that's so everybody's doing cold plunges wrong, by the way.
Am I doing it wrong too?
No, I don't think so. Well, here's what I would say. There's all this like mythos about why cold plunges help you as an athlete, right?
Yeah.
Most all of them are untrue. It's not going to help you build muscle. It's not going to do this. It's not going to do that. The biggest benefit to a cold plunge is really just that you're resetting the relationship, the brain's relationship with your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. So when you engage in any activity that is like, call it sort of existentially fatiguing, right? Something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
It can be like cleaning the garage. It can be doing a cold plunge. It can be doing anything like that you have some sort of emotional friction to. That's called limbic friction.
Yeah.
So limbic friction is super, super important for the brain, and it's super, super important for driving the right neurochemistry in the brain. So when you engage in different kinds of limbic friction, there's a part of the brain that's like just off the foramen magnum in the back, and it's called your mid-cingulate cortex, right? So the mid-cingulate cortex is the one responsible for your willpower, okay? So anytime you engage in limbic friction, the mid-cingulate cortex actually can grow, and it's one of the very few parts of the brain that can grow. So when you engage in limbic friction over and over again, that mid-cingulate cortex is getting stronger and growing, and you're building out gray matter, and you're building out neural pathways to the rest of the brain, and you're also operating across the corpus callosum more effectively, so you're having better transference of information across the left and the right side. And limbic friction is the number one driver for that. And that will also reduce people's, for example, addiction sort of concepts, right? So if you're like trying to quit smoking or drinking, or you just need to be less lazy or get your shit done, when you're engaging that mid-cingulate cortex over and over again, you have a much, much better chance of achieving like literally any goal in your life, because you're building out physically the neural pathways of willpower over and over again.
Yep.
And that's the real big benefit to the cold plunge. Yeah. And the best way that you can do a cold plunge is that your goal should be to have the lowest heart rate as possible by the end. So what we do with our athletes is we do a 40-degree cold plunge, and we check the heart rate at 1 minute and then also at 4 minutes and 10 seconds. And that's when the cold plunge is over, because that's when we sort of have a reductive quality about how effective it is after 4 minutes and 10 seconds. So that's our upper limit, and we check the heart rate at 1 minute and at 4:10. And the goal for the athlete is to have the lowest heart rate as possible at 4:10. And so that's their kind of structured goal. Just like if you're going to the gym and you're doing cardio or something like that, we're actually doing it with an intention. We're not just getting in there and suffering. We have this concept where we're trying to seek the lowest heart rate possible, and we want it to be happening as quickly as possible. And that's a really big signifier of how effective that mid-cingulate cortex is.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the main reason I do it nowadays. Like, I don't actually think that I'm getting any crazy benefits other than I'm awake, and it's something I don't want to do every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have been getting a lot better at lowering my like heart rate now. Like, it gets down pretty quickly, and I don't really even suffer too much anymore.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So I just like it because it's like wakes your ass up first thing in the morning.
Yeah, it does. Well, I mean, it's like hitting the nervous system with a Looney Tunes sledgehammer. You're getting that cold water, and your nervous system is like, okay, we are on right now. It's gangbusters. So, and that's super, super effective, and super, super effective for just sort of setting the cadence of the nervous system. There's also huge positive affect for your circadian rhythm when it comes to doing a cold plunge, because you're activating that nervous system really aggressively early in the day. And for a lot of people, especially in like this, Western lifestyle, we're probably typically not really engaging the nervous system to a high degree until later in the day, whether it's like at a work thing or whatever. But if it's at like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, that's the first time your nervous system is engaged. It's probably not going to cool down in time for you to have a really good, healthy, 5 REM cycles of sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else have you been up to lately? You've been working with a lot of UFC fighters. You can't name them, though.
I cannot name them, but I've been working with a lot of UFC fighters. We've got a couple of champs, and they're doing great. We're growing their lungs.
Yeah?
It's crazy. Like I said, we'll be releasing some medical paperwork through the university, to sort of align with some of these other projects. And then also I've had an offer recently to have kind of a bit of a headline show on the Strip here, where I'll do like a fire act and a juggling act, and obviously like a megalithic breath hold as part of it. And we've actually got 2 quite big projects coming up for us this year, where we'll be doing quite a bit of entertainment here in Vegas for these 2 different really big projects. I've kind of like, I kind of stepped away from entertainment for like, I don't know, like a couple of years seemingly, because things just went so crazy with the research that we're doing that it never made sense for me to even really engage that much in entertainment. I mean, obviously, we have our production company, but Mel has had an insanely banner year and has been really just running that, herself. She was the lead in the opening ceremonies of the Saudi Games, and then all sorts of other just like really big fun projects. And now, and ironically, some of this entertainment work has come back to us because of the waves that we've been making sort of in the medical world, and some of the fun projects that we've been doing behind the scenes in terms of the research with universities and things like that. So it'll it'll be really fun to get back involved and really go hard in some of my own training for a while, do a couple different things for some of these projects. And and also we're, if anybody's interested in breath holding, we are full stop. I need a whole bunch of understudies for a handful of projects. So if you're an artist here in Vegas and Tanner and I, then reach out to me, because we're currently training a bunch of understudies for a handful of different things that'll be underwater. Some cinema, some film, some live entertainment. So, yeah.
Cool. So one thing that I remember about you when I first met you is you were coming from a show in China.
That is right. Yeah.
How was that? What show was it again?
So that was called the Han Show in
the Han Show.
Quaint little village called Wuhan, China.
Dang, I've never heard of that place.
Yeah, lived there.
Sounds like a good place.
Lived there for 4.5 years. I don't know if I told you like the whole Batman villain about how that show came about.
No, tell me.
So, the most expensive Cirque du Soleil show of all time is Ka, right?
That makes sense.
You're looking at about 120 million dollars for that full production. Okay, so the Han show was 400 million. So it's crazy, right? This is like almost 4 times the scale of the largest production show of all time, and it's going to be in Wuhan, China.
Who put it on again?
So the richest guy in China, well, like him and this other guy. So you got Taobao, right?
Yeah.
So the guy who started Taobao is like the other richest guy. And then this guy, Wan Jingling, he's the biggest real estate developer in China. He owns everything in Wuhan. It's his home base. He owns every hotel, every street sweeper, every bar, club, restaurant, taxi, everything. He owns the whole place, okay? And there's 11 million people that live there, 14 million if you consider like city large versus city proper. So he owns the whole place. He wants to turn Wuhan into the next Beijing or Shanghai, make it a little more cosmopolitan and more of a kind of a destination for Asia in general, but specifically China. And if the cost of living rises there by just a couple of points, he's going to make billions on the back end because he owns the whole damn place.
Yeah.
Okay. So he gets in touch with, Franco Dragone, who was obviously the visionary behind Cirque du Soleil, and they put together a project where it's going to be nearly $500 million for this show. It's like this insane custom theater by Fisher, and Franco is going to produce the show. And then there's a shopping street, like a high-end shopping street that's maybe a couple miles long, that's like Coach and Chanel and all these other places, which, in China, there's so much fake stuff everywhere, right? So to be able to actually buy it from these places is novel for the sort of elites there in China. And then on the other end is going to be a theme park. So the whole project is $2 billion. There's a theme park, which is about $500 million. There's the walking street, which is about $1 billion. And then there is the show, which is $400 million. So I was part of the artistic team on that. And so we go to China. It's crazy. I wasn't in love with it. But the show was incredible. It was so much fun to do. And essentially we had a blank check. We could myself and John Brady, we could, Jono, right? Yeah. Yeah. We could put together anything. Anything, any idea was not too insane, right? And then, it was the on-site creation was about 9 months, and it was the craziest show of all time. I mean, the set was really similar to O, but like 5 times the size, legitimately, like 5 times the size. The stage, the whole theater moved, and it was completely off the rails. And then I left like a year before the coronavirus, or maybe like 8 months or something. And when I left, I was already, hell-bent on this underwater act and performance that I'm going to do with Mel. Mel and I had re-met in Nepal a couple months before I left, and, just like wildly fell in love, and we're like, oh my God, we're just going to go finish this we're going to go do this project. So I've got this plan to move to Vegas because that's the best place to set up a production company, essentially. We'd also considered north side of Paris, where I lived for many years. And so we moved to Vegas. Cirque du Soleil hit me up when I had left Dragon and said, "Oh, hey, heard that you're not with Franco anymore. Do you want to come?" I did one additional show for them in Andorra called Rebel, which was like one of their little touring shows, and then they gave me an offer to work at O. So I was like, "Oh, lovely. I'll go work at O for a couple months." And nobody knows that I'm already like 1 foot out the door, so it's all good. So I went and I did O for a little while, and then obviously the pandemic happened, and it just closed everything down, right? And when I had left Wuhan, a few months later, they're saying like, "Oh, there's kind of this spooky thing happening where there's this virus." And then shortly after that, all of my friends that were still in Wuhan, the government, the military had come by, put bars on everyone's apartment doors, right? So like a steel bar welded to the frame so that no one's doors could open more than about 8 inches. And somebody from the military would come by once a week, drop off a sack of rice, and the only reason that you could get the bar taken off would be if somebody died inside, okay? So they were trapped like this for like 8 fucking months, all right?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, okay? This is insane. And here's something you don't hear about on the news. So what happens if there's a fire in that building? Okay.
Well, I'm going to guess that everyone dies.
Yes, correct. And that happened on a couple different occasions throughout Wuhan because everybody was bolted into their apartments. And we're talking about these insane apartment buildings that are like 10, 20,000 residents, And here's something else crazy. So I've got a friend who owns one of the largest hospital chains in North America, so broadly the world. And the government of China had contracted him to assess the cost of the largest elderly care facility in the world. And it would be like practically 1 million patients, okay? Because we have this really kind of kooky thing, I guess from an anthropology perspective. In China, they had the one-child policy for so long, okay?
Yeah.
So because of that, and then the economic boom that happened in China, you've got all of these elderly Chinese people that don't have anyone to look after them because they've got one kid, right? And that one kid can't support mom and dad, right, as time goes on. Mm-hmm. So you've got this kind of wacky social crisis happening where you've got all of these elderly Chinese, right? And how's that going to play out socioeconomically? And so my friend who owns this largest hospital sort of situation, the government of China contracted him for several years to figure out how much it would cost to host like near 1 million people to be in elderly care. This astronomical campus that was going to be built outside of Wuhan, okay, of all places. So they pay him several $1 million, about $16 million, just to come up with a budget for what that would look like, to do all the engineering, all the design work on this whole campus and facility. So they pay my friend's company an astronomical amount of money, and then they took that information and then they never got back to him, right? So they never got back to him and ghosted him, okay? So they didn't care. I mean, the upcharge on the engineering and the design work is larger than the upcharge on sort of the fabrication or like the development, essentially. So my friend was like, "Well, all right, I guess they don't want it." Okay. Then about 8 months later, coronavirus hits. Okay, so you got tens and tens and tens and tens of millions of elderly people, and it's going to cost you X amount to take care of them. And then you know, connect the dots however you want. I mean, but they decided, no, we're not going to build that facility. And then coronavirus happened, and a whole bunch of elderly people died.
I can't imagine that the coronavirus was good for that guy that owns everything, right?
I mean, bit of a mixed bag. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, so here's the crazy thing about that whole project. The cost of living in Wuhan did rise enormously. Went up like 170% in the first year after the theme park and the walking street and the show. So, I mean, he made tens of billions on the back end. And then he wrote the show off as a loss, right? When we ran the numbers on the show, it would have to run at full capacity for something insane like 270 years before it would break even, right?
Yeah.
So he writes that off as a loss. He's made cajillions on the back end. Obviously, Wuhan has a really big sort of cultural stain about how we talk about it because of all this. I remember when we were putting the show together, I was in a production meeting, and Jono says, you know, everybody's like tired. We've been working, you know, crazy hours and stuff for, you know, all these months. Jono says, oh, like, because he's always up for a laugh, and he's just trying to give everybody a bit of a smile. And he's like, guys, you know, when we're done with this, nobody will ever remember Wuhan, ever, except for the Han show. It's too big. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
No one will ever remember the city for anything except for the Han show. And everybody's like, oh, that is so correct. That is so true. Yeah. Nobody will ever remember Wuhan except for the Han show. Yeah. And then a couple years later,
like, hold my beer.
And then a couple years later, this happens. We're like, I texted Jono later, like years later. It was like, remember that time we were saying that Wuhan's only going to be on the map for the Han show, and then now the world's ending.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Just because of Wuhan.
Yeah, it was crazy. I walked by the Wuhan coronavirus laboratory. I walked by it every day for years.
Man, sounds like you were patient zero. Come right over here just in time to spread the virus to everyone.
Yeah, that was crazy.
So, you also do like juggling and stuff as well. Have you been doing that at all?
No.
No more juggling?
I don't juggle anymore. I did have a juggling act for a couple of shows. I worked, you know, for Cirque and Dragon for a while as a juggler. But no. What I do now is I price myself out because I mean, you know, we still have our production company, but I have no interest in juggling really. And by and large, I think that the world doesn't need more jugglers. So
probably not, to be honest.
Juggling is teachable autism. You take somebody with good social skills and a little bit of OCD or ADHD, teach them to juggle. 3 years later, they will. I mean, you lock yourself in a racquetball gym and you juggle for like 8 hours a day, and you're just obsessed and you've lost your mind. And then you're a good juggler, more or less, right? No, I don't really juggle anymore. I've had like a couple of gigs here and there. Essentially, the only times that I juggle now is if Mel is on a gig and there's an option for a juggler to be in the show, and I'll be like, all right, well, I'll go do it. Would love to, right? Love to work with Mel and, you know, spend that quality time. So, but outside of that, I really don't anymore. I'm actually heading to Texas in about 2 weeks. I've got to get a hand surgery done. That's pretty complicated because I had a hand balancing act for many years. I had a juggling act for many years. I was a diver for a long time. I did a lot of trapeze and Russian swing. So my hand is so fried now, and I can't pick up like fine objects, and my grip strength is completely gone. So anyway, I'm having a little bit of a complicated surgery done on it. And then after that, you know, I'll just be happy if my hand works again. And I have no interest in really juggling much anymore. But,
yeah.
You know, juggling is good though. I do teach like most of our athletes and to juggle because it's one of the few things that's been shown to increase total gray matter in the brain. So good for everybody to juggle, right? Probably not really good for anybody to devote their life to juggling and just, you know, go down that rabbit hole to some insane level where you're, I don't know. It's a whole thing, as you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't juggle very well at all, so I don't really know too much. But
all good.
So what's
do you
up
know
with
who? Do you know who Vladik? Vladik is Vladik Mijakovic.
Yeah, I did one show with him. He's the best.
Vladik's like the greatest juggler that's ever lived. So I used to say to, like, you know, because we have him on our roster, and if somebody wants like the most premium juggler ever, it's Vladik, right?
Yeah.
And my act was quite similar to Vladik's. So you have like Victor Key, and then you have Vladik, you have myself, all like relatively similar acts, quite acrobatic, and then some varying levels of high technical skills. Mine was not nearly as high as Vladik's. I did 5 clubs. I would kick up to 7 balls. I did 8 rings. For a brief period of time, I did 9 balls, but very shortly. But I mean, Vladik's like a freak, you know, 5 club pirouettes and all that crazy stuff. And I would tell clients, like, you know, because if Vladik wasn't available, I would do it. I'd say, well, like, I'm like if you ordered Vladik from Wish.com, you know, it's like we're like the same height, kind of have the same look. Acts are very similar, but one's just like quite a bit better than the other one, you know. So I'd show up and like it kind of looks like the picture, like
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
boy.
funny.
Yeah.
Juggling. That's so maybe some jugglers should start like tech companies or something.
Probably.
I'm reading Peter Thiel's book right now.
Oh yeah.
He talks about how every single tech entrepreneur has some sort of form of autism or Asperger's.
I'm not shocked at all. I mean, I was clinically diagnosed with OCD, you know, early in my life, and I have a good handle on it now,
Yeah.
right? But certainly, you know, that monster can like get crazy if you feed it the wrong things.
Yeah, I do. I have pretty bad OCD. I do like little stupid things, like I won't go to the bathroom until I finish this project. I'll be sitting here like doing like, hurry up.
Well, I don't know if I would call that OCD. I mean, real OCD is much more crippling than that.
Sometimes it can be crippling. Sometimes I'll be doing shit like crossing my nose, but I have to do it 4 times.
Yeah.
Or like I'll just randomly like turn my neck 4 times, and people are like,
Yeah.
dude, did you break your neck?
I don't have a whole lot of empathy for what you're saying. It gets a lot worse than that.
What?
So, like, for example, if I was like young and I'm like sitting in a car, I'm like counting, you know, every stop sign and pine tree or something on the highway. But then, like, if a truck comes by and then you can't count the
You have to start
number
over.
of no, you have a panic attack and you cry, you freak out,
Yeah.
because you've lost your fucking mind, because you're like, I can't undo this.
Yeah.
I don't know how many are there, and then you have a panic attack and you're crying, and then you're a couple hours to recover because you've completely lost it.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a leap from like, oh, I like my apartment clean. I mean, I think people are pretty cavalier when they say like, oh, I have OCD or I have ADHD. I'm like, well, I don't know. I've got friends with brutal ADHD where they're constantly having, you know, different sort of panic attacks and things like that. And I feel the same way about OCD, where it's, anyway, I've limited sympathy for what you're saying.
Mine used to be bad, really bad in like, I would say like elementary school or something.
Yeah.
And it's gotten, when it was like bad to where I couldn't think about certain things like you're saying. I never had panic attacks or anything. But I kind of trained myself to have certain habits that were more you can get away with than other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would do some weird shit back in the day. I just programmed myself to do like little tics that people don't notice.
Yeah. Well, and you know, there's quite a little Venn diagram between like autism, Asperger's, OCD. I mean, they're all holding hands pretty strong. So I think a lot of unique high achievers, whether they've been diagnosed or not, often exist somewhere on that spectrum between that sort of holy trinity of instability.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
maybe people's brains are just supercharged in one specific area a little bit too much.
Yeah, that is for sure.
Yeah. So, you want to talk about some crazy stuff going on in the world?
Hit me with it. What's
well,
going?
I don't know if you heard, but someone blew themselves up in the
Yeah.
in the Trump Tower Tesla.
Yeah,
Did you
wasn't
hear
he
about that?
like wasn't he a military guy?
Like Green Beret military, like super high
yeah,
level.
Yeah.
And thought that people were following him, or maybe they were. I don't know. He's high enough to get on some sort of he was on a like reality TV show or something like that, some game show with Tim Kennedy.
Okay.
And they had like shooting competitions and stuff. So he's pretty high level. So maybe, but they were saying if he had chose any car other than the Cybertruck, that would have actually
I'm aware of that.
caused something. I'm like, oh man, he chose the Cybertruck. But do you think the next 15 days is going to be madness until Trump gets in there? I know you're a big supporter of Trump, right?
I'm indifferent, brother. I'm indifferent. I thought that Trump was a bad choice, and I also thought that Kamala was a bad choice. I thought that Biden was a bad choice. I've got no skin in the game, so I mean, I don't know. I haven't been following politics very much recently, but we're certainly going to see a really unique next couple of years.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, right? Because, by and large, what we're witnessing with the health of planet Earth is it's going to have some major consequences. And when we think about, Mexico City is completely out of water, right? The amount of plastic in the ocean exceeds by weight the amount of fish. Okay. This is insane, right? You're going to see cities like Jakarta,
Jakarta?
Jakarta.
Where's Jakarta?
In Indonesia.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So Jakarta is a huge city, right? Very, very poor infrastructure, incredible number of people. We're going to see cities like Jakarta just fall and completely collapse. And when you think about sort of migrant populations that are completely fucked, we're not ready for how that's going to look, right? Mexico City's out of water. We've got all sorts of issues in South America. Parts of the Pacific Rim are so fucked for, their industries rely on fishing, and the amount of plastic there is so nuclear. It's unbelievable. They're also running out of water. Jakarta has, or even Mexico City has sunk like 5 inches a year just because of the amount of groundwater that's being removed. The consequences about what's happening globally will not be fully understood. And, the next 4 or 5 years are going to be wild to witness. And
I'm most excited about the Doge. The Doge coin.
Yeah.
No, the Department of Government Efficiency. Because I feel like, I forget who, I think it was Peter Thiel that said it. Like the whole government is like running. It's like the DMV everywhere, though.
Yes.
So, of course, nothing gets done. No one's incentivized to do anything on time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like having union workers run the whole entire world.
Yeah.
So, I guess they kind of do. But
Mm-hmm.
so to get a bunch of like high-end entrepreneurs in there and just kind of shake up the system a little bit.
I welcome it. I welcome the change. I think we have no choice. We obviously can't continue down the path that we're on right now.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm also very much not a Democrat, and I think that the Democrats are so fucked. It's unbelievable. I think that they've misplayed their hands so many times, and I just can't get on board with like literally any of their platform. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz should probably be in jail for how bad she torpedoed Bernie's candidacy. Previously. It's disgusting.
I was all in the Yang gang,
dude.
Had math hat and everything.
Yeah, I remember.
Back in the day.
I remember.
I just like entrepreneurs. I just want entrepreneurs to run the government because I feel like if you're an entrepreneur, you live with real life consequences.
Mm-hmm.
If you screw up, you deal with the blowback. if you're a normal government politician, you've never ran anything, when you screw up, usually nothing happens. If you're like an employee your whole life, nothing really happens.
I do agree with that to some extent. However, I guess my beef there is that the buy-in from the entrepreneur needs to be for the betterment of that society as opposed to personal gain. And that's the biggest issue I have with entrepreneurs running the government is essentially it's really possible to have your hand in the cookie jar. And yes, there are huge consequences, but the wins and the losses come down to personal gain and not necessarily, cultural gain for the country. So, I mean, Elon Musk, right? What is he worth? Like 20 million or 40 million, like 10 years ago. Now it's like 280 million, right? Or billion.
It's like 440 billion now.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's really difficult for me to sort of colloquialize that his role in the government is not based in personal gain because it's clear that he has some kind of sycophantic engagement with his desire to be, the richest man that's ever walked Earth, right? So how do we separate that culturally and make sure that there are some sort of democratic checks and balances that allow his decisions or Trump's decisions to not be for personal gain? And I think that we do a really poor job of holding our legislation, our senators, our congressmen accountable. I mean, the number one role of all of our legislators is not to govern. It's in raising money for their next campaign. 90% of their workday is based on how they're going to be campaigning for their next run. So we're obviously doing something terribly wrong there. And you look at somebody like Nancy Pelosi, who makes a salary of like, I don't know, a few $100,000 a year. Yeah. And she's worth hundreds of millions now, right? I mean, obviously, she's not up to task to be taking care of the American people. So a lot of these people are entrepreneurs. I mean, I would call Nancy Pelosi an entrepreneur, but her goal is for personal gain. So how do we get the right sort of energy from that entrepreneurial mindset, but make sure that we're safeguarded so that that person's skill set is working for the people and not for personal gain? And that's an issue that obviously anthropologically we've struggled with since the beginning of mankind.
Yeah, I think we need to pay them more and eliminate all of these other little ways they can make money on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is, I mean, that can't really happen the way that we're set up right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it would take moving heaven and earth to make that kind of change. But I completely agree. We definitely need to pay them a fucking shit ton more.
We're the best.
Because we need to incentivize people with these skill sets to be able to do that work. But they need to be able to do it for the populace, right? And that just doesn't really exist, unfortunately. So the next few years are going to be absolutely insane. I think the world, I think the whole world is completely fucked by 2030. My goal is to engage in the system until about 2030, and then probably take my chips out and
move back to Wuhan.
Probably not. Yeah,
dude, I was terrified of doing the Rose Parade this past week. I was just like, dude, what if there's a terrorist attack or some crazy shit? And then there's two things that happen. One is in my hometown, and then the other one's at another parade-esque kind of thing. And it was just like, those things did happen, and that's what I thought was going to happen. They just didn't happen where I was. I hope it chills out, but it seems like it's going to be crazy the next few years.
It's going to be crazy. It's going to be really crazy. And water is becoming a commodity. Have I told you about the water situation in Vegas? Have we had this discussion?
No.
All right. So, here's the Reader's Digest version. So, there's like this compact made with these 5 states. You got like Arizona, Nevada, Utah, California, New Mexico. Now, there was a compact made in the 1920s that said, California, you get from the Colorado Basin, right? So you get 70% of the water. Nevada, you get 60%. Utah, you get 60%. Arizona, you get 55. New Mexico, you get 65%. So obviously, that's way more than 100%, right? When you total those up.
Yeah.
So this was never an issue for the last roughly 100 years because there was just enough water coming down. However, now we're having all sorts of water issues. And specifically as it comes through the Colorado Basin, we supply, the Colorado River supplies all the water for California, all the farming. 80% of the food that exists on people's tables comes from California in some degree. So the problem is all that's being litigated in court right now because we're having these water issues. California's going to win because they have the most money. Nevada kind of comes in second place because we kind of have the second most money. And it's also in our backyard. The problem is none of that is ever going to get litigated before water crises, come to fruition.
Yeah.
There's no chance. We're talking about like 10 years in litigation. So because of that, what we will see is that there will just have to be a hard stop on water exploitation. Now, here in Nevada, we're in a really unique situation, specifically Vegas. Not Reno, not the rest of Nevada, but specifically Vegas. So where we're going to see these huge water restrictions come in is when the water level at the dam gets to a certain point where it can no longer produce hydroelectric power for LA, for example, right? Then the water restrictions will just happen overnight, okay? And now the litigation's out the window.
Yeah.
You just won't fucking get water. So when that happens, everybody's a little bit fucked. Here's the unique situation about Vegas, though, and not just Nevada, but specifically Vegas. We get our water from the other side of the dam. Of those 5 states, of all those cities, of everybody involved in that, we get all of our water from a straw that comes from the river side of the dam.
Will we get it from the top or the bottom?
We get it from the bottom, but it comes from the other side of the dam.
Yeah, it's pretty close, though.
So all of the other water that has to come out that's, tied to these restrictions and the hydroelectric power that, goes to LA and stuff like that, we have not an infinite resource of water, but the thing is, when those restrictions happen, Vegas will not run out of water. It would be literally impossible because the amount of water that's been going out from the other side of the dam has been supporting a population of damn near 100 million people and farmland. Mm-hmm. Now, when that drops to a certain point where it's no longer producing hydroelectric power, we will have unlimited water, essentially, right? Because we'll be able to keep pulling from the riverside of the dam, as opposed to being allocated a ration of the water that comes out from the other side. So I've got a friend who owns a nuclear reactor company, and he's moving his whole operation here to Las Vegas for this reason. And this is how I got this kind of education from him about how the whole water situation is looking, is that, let's say that the water is going to drop to a level where it's, cannot produce more hydroelectric power. So there's going to be huge water cuts. Now, that amount of water that's been coming in, that's been supporting nearly 100 million people in farmland across the entire West Coast, is still at the availability of Las Vegas specifically because of how this whole thing was structured, cajillion years ago. So Vegas is in a really unique situation in that way. And I think economically, what we're going to see is a huge housing market bubble that's going to absolutely bust in places like Phoenix and Tucson. So you're already seeing limitations on expansion of suburbia in Phoenix and Tucson because the easiest way to lose water is through suburbia. So you have all these limitations coming in these other cities, and it's falsely inflating the price of real estate in places like Phoenix and Tucson, because now there's limitations as far as how much the grid can expand. So let's say in Phoenix or Tucson, they're putting limitations on further growth of suburbia and stuff like that. So it's inflating the real estate prices there. However, when this crush happens and the limitations just kind of happen overnight because it's no longer viable to produce hydroelectric power for LA, those markets are going to crash. They're going to tank astronomically. However, here we do not have limitations on those things for a couple of reasons. One is because we have the greatest water reclamation system essentially ever devised, which is so ironic and outrageous that this mafia town, from back in the day, has this closed loop water reclamation system where we're reclaiming about 95% of the water that's used. The water that we lose, it all goes to, lawns, essentially. Even the casinos, the hotels, everything is on this closed loop. So for that reason, ironically, the larger we get, the larger the closed loop of water is, which actually makes us safer from a drought because the closed loop is larger. So for that reason, I think that the real estate here in Vegas is going to go absolutely to the moon at the same time that some of these other bubbles crash in places like Phoenix and Tucson and Albuquerque and stuff like that when these limitations come into play. Now, here is a sort of unique sort of whiplash to that based on our water. One of the biggest drawbacks to all of this in terms of the positive propensities that Vegas has in that whole conversation is that because this water is being recycled over and over and over again, it goes to a water filtration plant and then it goes back into the wash. Now, our microplastics here in Vegas are higher than virtually everywhere that exists on planet Earth because this water is getting recycled over and over and over again from the whole Colorado, over and over. So the microplastics in the water here in Vegas are so much higher than literally everywhere on planet Earth, except for a couple different places on the Pacific Rim, like Jakarta, for example. So if you don't have a reverse osmosis system, right?
Thank God I got one.
You're consuming so much plastic here. It's beyond belief. We're talking like a 10x compared to most other major cities in the entire world.
What if you have a well?
So you're safe there if you have a well.
I got a well and reverse osmosis.
There you go. You're lovely. So that's a bit of a unique sort of socioeconomic crisis that's kind of burgeoning. And then obviously it will affect the poorest populations the worst, just like every kind of humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
And as because we filter, we treat this water, but we don't treat it to remove microplastics because it would be literally impossible unless we had a nuclear reactor and about 40 football fields worth of water filtration plants set up. The amount of energy required to remove microplastics from the water is unbelievable, right? It's about 1,000 to 1 compared to just, removing some various chemicals and chlorine or things like that. So completely impossible for that to occur here. And because of that, the density, the amount of microplastics here in Vegas will essentially, especially when these water crises happen in the future and we have restrictions and then we have a housing boom here, that level of microplastics will go to the moon, and it's already at the moon. So we're going to have a really weird situation here in Vegas where Vegas has, seemingly indefinite water, but at the highest toxicity of microplastics in the history of humankind, which obviously leads to Alzheimer's and dementia and all these other issues. I mean, it's so hard to get microplastics out of the body. The most effective way to remove microplastics from the body is really through plasma donation. That's where we host a lot of microplastics, is in our blood plasma. And then men in general have higher levels of microplastics because we're not having a period, so we're not losing blood, right, and constantly sort of replenishing and replacing that. And so the microplastic situation here in Vegas is kind of a unique thing that's not really spoken about, especially with our senators or anything like that. I mean, they could give a fuck. But it will definitely come to bear. It will definitely kind of show its face soon.
Damn.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Wow. glad we're ending on a positive note. I'm glad that I have the reverse osmosis filter and a well.
Yeah.
So I'm good. I'm going to start a water business. If you guys need water, let me know.
Do it, brother.
That's crazy. So where can everyone check out your stuff, your medical lab thing that you got?
Yeah, so...
Can I go? I want to go.
Yeah, I mean, come to Summerlin. We'll, do an intake with you and stuff like that. Check out your lungs and your heart, all that jazz. My company's called Elite Performance Design, and I'm very much not on social media, but I am making an intention this year to be a little bit more on social media.
Me too.
Because, I realize the value in that, but at the same time, we've never done any outreach. We've never done any marketing whatsoever for our consulting, and we still turn away probably 2 to 1 in terms of how many people reach out to us.
Yeah.
And so we've never had to do any of that, but at the same time, we do want to sort of signify our brand a little bit. We'll be releasing medical papers with the university later this year. I'll probably go public with a world record, and we'll have a couple of shows popping off here in town. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's just at Brandon Birchak. I think there's maybe even never been a post from Elite Performance Design on the if an Instagram handle even exists. But I'll be posting a lot on my own personal Brandon Birchak, and then obviously our production company 6 Foot Creations. Feel free to follow us. Austin and Bryson, the greatest video editors that have ever walked this earth, have produced all of our material, and it's gorgeous. And and then we'll see how everything goes. I mean, I've got a couple of really big pretty famous podcasts that I'll be getting on this year.
Nice.
And we'll do some world records, and we'll produce some shows and kind of all that, and probably go public with some of our relationships with various UFC champs and other high profile athletes. So we'll see. It's going to be a crazy year. We're pretty much completely stacked and booked for all of 2025.
Dope.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you guys check out Brandon. And also, if you're a circus acrobat, we are hiring. So we'll be hosting an event on February 6th at my place. If you guys are looking for a job, hit me up.
Do it.
We'll see you guys the next one. Make sure you subscribe. Bye-bye, everyone. Don't drink the water in Vegas.
Cheers, brother. It was really good.
That concludes this episode of the Off Axis Podcast. If you guys found value in this, please consider sharing with your friends. Also, subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Bye, everyone.